Hello, everyone. My name is Shams Kader. My gender pronouns are he, his, and him. I am joining you today from Halifax, Nova Scotia, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I am currently working as a part-time faculty member at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Mount St. Vincent University. I'm so happy to be here today as a part of this 2021 IASPM-Canada conference. I was really looking forward to it for a long time. And my paper today is called Being Your Own Aesthetic Boss, Practicing Independence in the Central Sydney Independent Music Scene. About independent music. Independent music is a complex concept. It has had different meanings within popular music narratives at various historical and cultural moments. The most common definition of independent music may be that it is music distributed by independent record labels. What independent music refers to might vary depending on context, but at its core, it signifies an oppositional ethos regarding maintaining distinction in terms of modes, aesthetics, and infrastructures from those of mainstream music, that is commodified popular music produced by major record labels. This way of thinking about independent versus mainstream is linked to long-standing discourses that make narrow distinctions between commercialized mass culture and alternative forms of culture informed by contesting binaries of art versus commerce. Though exactly what mainstream music is, may also vary in discourses that distinguish it from independent or alternative. Rather than assume some kind of fixed binary between independent forms and those that depend on the mainstream, it is more useful to approach independent music as a cultural practice. No such practice can be purely independent, although it might be somewhat independent of some things and more dependent on some conditions than others. The cultural practice of independent music entails different forms of exchanges, where actors in a particular geographic location and temporal specific milieu use the economic, cultural, and social resources available to them on which they are dependent. Practices of independent musicians, therefore, may be framed as practicing independence. This paper examines how Central Sydney independent musicians practice independence within the cultural economy of the Central Sydney independent music scene. It analyzes the resources and forms of labor through which participants maintain independent practices. I argue that members of the Central Sydney independent music scene can afford to be their own aesthetic boss within the scene if they accept dependence on other strategies and resources beyond independent music. The Central Sydney independent music scene, the main area of my paper today. My doctoral research findings indicate that the Central Sydney independent music phenomena is a socio-cultural formation of like-minded, largely middle-class musicians and enthusiasts involved with independent music in some of the inner west and inner city areas of Sydney, Australia, which I identify as a scene. As scenes operate as highly localized and specialized form of sociality, a local music scene is defined as a social activity taking place within certain geographical spaces over a specific time frame, where members such as musicians, producers, fans, etc., recognize their common music taste and philosophy. Independent music communities are best thought of as scenes because they tend to have porous boundaries, are changeable and relatively unstable, and independent forms can change, but resemblances persist. The Central Sydney independent music scene version of independent music is partly characterized by live performances and multiple genre aesthetic experimentation. This version of independent music practices is imbued with a do-it-yourself DIY ethos and a low-cost break-even economy that is not about seeking financial profits, but such practices are informed by ethical commitments regarding mutually and often voluntarily supporting each other, plus egalitarian, all-inclusive community building, and progressive gender and sexual politics. Empirical findings that inform this paper are based on qualitative strategies of inquiry conducted between 2017 and 2019. These included semi-structured interviews with 15 individuals of the ages of 18 and above who are involved with the scene, supplemented with detailed field notes from conducting participant observation at live gigs and other scene-related events. Types of independent musicians within this central Sydney independent music scene. According to the study participants, all earn a modest income from live performances. How much they charge primarily depends on the number of audience members their live performances attract. A local, well-known independent band in Sydney can charge around 1,000 Australian dollars to 2,000 Australian dollars for one night, which gets divided among the members of the band. Additionally, research participants generate small amounts of income by selling their records and merchandise. The average income per month for a local independent musician from sales of their music and merchandise may be anything between 100 Australian dollars to 400 Australian dollars. My study findings suggest that scene-based earnings from performing live and selling records and merchandise are not enough to support their living. Participants' music-making practices within the scene are not oriented towards pursuing financial profit. These practices are concerned with reaching a break-even economy where revenues from performing live, organizing gigs, selling music and merchandise within the scene contribute towards partially subsidizing the expenses of scene participation. Their independent practices are more about effective returns from producing aesthetically independent music and ethical commitments regarding earnings from their scene-based music-making practices where breaking even is considered enough. This is possible because majority of the Central Sydney independent musicians practice music making on the back of financial security. Most of them are from middle-class socioeconomic backgrounds, and some of them are university educated and or classically trained musicians. While analyzing how the research participants manage to sustain their livelihood, my findings suggest that there are largely two types of independent musicians within this location and temporal specific scene. I call them professional independents and semi-professional independents. Professional independents are musicians who are engaged full-time with music making while also being independent contractors and sole traders. Within the scene, professional independents are highly skilled, generally classically trained musicians who engage with passion projects comprising experimentation of different styles and genres of music. Beyond the scene, they undertake various casual or fixed-term jobs in the mainstream music and creative industries, including session playing, composing music for advertisements and theater productions, and organizing festivals and corporate events, etc. Some of them are known to teach music, as well as depend on their partner's income and or family wealth to subsidize their living. Semi-professional independents, on the other hand, are musicians who are involved with music making in a part-time capacity. Semi-professional independents refer to musicians who, as similarly articulated by Haynes and Marshall, are involved with music making in their leisure time and generally for pleasure, and sometimes for small amounts of money instead of pursuing a sustainable income or a living from it. Their livelihood is subsidized by income from a full-time job or casual jobs that are not necessarily limited to the music industries. There are coincidental similarities between my categorizations of professional and semi-professional independence and the way UK musicians identified themselves in the study of the UK live music by Burr. In their study, professional musicians self-identified as someone who has earned their living substantially from music for a significant portion of their working life, and semi-professional musicians as someone who is paid as a musician, but that is not necessarily how they earn their living. There are definitely similarities there. So this is a table of my 15 participants broken down into professional independence and semi-professional independence. Just keep it up here for all of you to have a look. So about the participants, the sample reveals that there is a slight gender imbalance with 4 participants identifying as female and one as a trans woman and the rest 10 as male. This is primarily because more people who identify as male responded to my research invitation than people who identify as other genders. This is partly because I did not restrict participants by gender when implementing the snowball sampling method. That is, when recruited participants nominated other important scene members to potentially take part in the study, in my study. I did not restrict their recommendations in terms of gender. The table also includes column headings of formally trained musician and university educated, because these characteristics are somewhat indicative of the study participants' socioeconomic class. A mixed economy. Analyzing the different strategies of constructing a living across both professional and semi-professional independence while participating in the central Sydney independent music scene reveals different economic modes. For instance, professional independent Molasses, pseudonym, operates as an independent contractor, engaging with different kinds of contract-to-contract music-related work across both mainstream music and the broader creative industries. He applies for government grants and organizes a variety of gigs for interested clients. Molasses also supports himself by teaching music as a means to an end. He is his own manager, booking agent, and promoter. Semi-professional independent Raven, pseudonym, works full-time at an FM radio station while his income is also supplemented by inherited wealth. Both categories of independence generate limited revenues from performing live, organizing gigs, selling music and merchandise within the local independent music scene. These different economic modes coexist in a mixed economy within the central Sydney independent music scene today. So key findings. Specific sets of affordances based on configurations of accumulated economic resources, musical literacies, social networks, and experience associated with long-term and recurrent involvement with music-related work shape the agency of each research participant as they operate in a mixed economy. Conceptually, this economy also involves multiple dependencies on mainstream music and the creative industries that materialize from long-established community-level networks with other musicians, music industry professionals, and creative practitioners, as depending on the alternative-based vocations cannot sustain a full living. The mixed economy model affords the research participants stylistic creativity, whereas mainstream music industry markets may not. The study participants successfully position themselves as their own aesthetic boss concerning their music making activities without necessarily feeling the economic pressures of, let's say, selling out, which follow the imperatives of the mainstream music market. I'm not implying that some musicians, like major record label artists, do not have the capacity to boss themselves. Creative workers may often enjoy autonomy even when they work for large corporations, and it is the same for any contemporary musicians. Furthermore, it may be an oversimplification to say that Central Sydney independent musicians are free to make whatever music they like, because studies into cultural laborers, self-government in cultural work, suggest that commercial pressures, social norms, and so on will shape their decisions in particular ways. So it is not like the Central Sydney independent musicians are completely aesthetically free or they get complete free reign of the kind of their music they're making. In conclusion, the Central Sydney independent musicians can afford to be their own aesthetic boss. That is, they're variably free to create the kind of music they want within their local scene because of the economic strategies they deploy, even if this means being involved in the mainstream music industries in other roles beyond the independent music scene. This adds one more variation to the concept of creative autonomy to existing academic literature about cultural work. Independence within the scene, then, is more about how the study participants navigate its cultural economy, entailing particular arrangements of exchanges between art and commerce. Scene members situate themselves through particular configurations of resources, strategies, and economic exchanges, which allow them to both construct their living and practice aesthetic independence in ways difficult to achieve if following imperatives of the mainstream music markets. The Central Sydney independent music scene members' practices of independence represent a distinctively sustainable form of independent music that is not simply concerned with art versus commerce tropes, reminiscent of classic representations of independent music cultures, such as depictions of youth culture within an oppositional ethos toward and tensions around selling out and going mainstream. Thank you so much for listening. These are my contact information. Thank you so much.